Only one man dares to challenge the darkness, the intrepid investigator Ichabod Crane, determined to uncover the secrets behind the terror that the shadow of the Headless Horseman casts. The Legend of the Headless Knight is a 1999 suspense and horror film. On a stormy night, Peter Vangar is traveling by carriage through the countryside when he is followed by a mysterious galloping presence. Suddenly, a deafening sound erupts and he finds himself horrified, witnessing his coachman being decapitated. In a moment of panic, he jumps from the carriage and runs desperately through the dark fields. He comes upon a sinister scarecrow as the sound of something approaching echoes around him. Before he can react, a cruel scythe descends, severing his own head. Advancing to the year 1799 in New York City, police officer Ichabod Crane makes a macabre discovery: the corpse of a man floating in the city's river. Despite Crane's protests about the need for a proper investigation, the body is taken to be cremated. His unshakable faith in science and tireless pursuit of true justice elicit hostility among his colleagues, resulting in his forced transfer to the small town of Sleepy Hollow to investigate 3 people who were found decapitated within 3 weeks. Detective Crane was sent to unravel these cases and arrest the perpetrator of the crimes to be tried in martial court. He used methods advanced for the time and brought all his equipment before departing for Sleepy Hollow. Upon arriving in the remote, isolated, and sinister village, his reception was not the best, but he formally introduced himself, saying he was Detective Crane and was there to solve the murders. They accommodated him and soon a meeting was scheduled with the farmers. The detective asked some questions and wanted to know if there were any suspects. Everyone became alarmed by the question. One farmer asked what his superiors had told him. He replied, "The information I have is that 3 people were killed by decapitation in open fields and the heads were found far from the bodies." One farmer then said, "No, that wasn't it, the heads weren't found." Another farmer said they were taken by the Headless Horseman to the depths of hell. The farmer then recounted the story of this horseman. Before his death, the horseman was different from all the others because he lived not for money but for the pleasure of taking lives. He rode on his mount, a giant black stallion named Dauntless. The horseman sharpened his teeth meticulously, not just to chew but also to intimidate his enemies. He gained fame for cutting off the heads of his enemies during the winter of 1779. He fell into an ambush and his horse was hit, sealing his fate there. 2 young women witnessed the terrible event, seeing him decapitated by his own sword. Since then, the woods have become a haunted place where no one dared venture. However, 2 decades later he awoke from the dead, returning to seek his revenge. The investigator is frightened by the story but says he doesn't believe it and that the killer is flesh and blood. He will arrest him. Later that night, an ominous aura hangs over the woods. The animals, agitated, sensing the malignant presence of the horseman. At dawn the next day, an alarmed man came to warn that the horseman had attacked again, leaving behind his 4th victim. The townspeople go to see the body and the detective arrives shortly after. He asks about the head and gets the answer that it was taken. In the reconstruction, the detective describes that the killer rode a large horse and used a very sharp blade, cutting off the head in 1 blow. The detective is informed by the man that there weren't 4 victims, but rather 5. So he decides to exhume the victims to investigate and takes the widow's body to examine it. He discovers that she was pregnant. At nightfall, the detective goes out to ride and realizes he is being watched and pursued by the Headless Horseman, but it was just a resident trying to scare him because he didn't like him. The detective and Katrina, a local resident of the region, develop a friendship that soon turns into romance between them. At another point he meets with the town magistrate and asks how he knew the woman was pregnant. He said that she had told him because he was the magistrate and she wanted advice. He emphatically stated that the one responsible for taking her life was the legendary Headless Horseman, a figure the detective always considered the result of superstitions and myths. Faced with the man's insistence, a feeling of irritation took over the detective while thunder echoed in the sky, adding a sinister atmosphere. Even the animals around seemed to feel the discomfort, agitating nervously. Suddenly, the loud sound of hooves beating echoed, indicating the rapid approach of a horse. The startled detective watched with growing apprehension as the dreaded Headless Horseman of the forest shadows materialized before his eyes. The detective witnessed it all up close and fainted shortly after. The detective remained isolated in his room in a state of shock and said, "I saw everything, it really was the Headless Horseman." Now he believed in the legend and recovered. He decided to go to the Headless Horseman's tomb in the Estrel Woods and asked who wanted to go with him. Everyone remained silent except for a boy named Bron who offered to go. So it was just the 2 of them. On the way, the detective tried to connect the facts and discover what each victim had to do with the other. They decided to go to a witch to find out how to locate the horseman's tomb. They continued their journey and met up with Katrina, who decided to go with them. They traveled several kilometers and arrived at the tree of the dead which bled from the trunk. With the axe they managed to find the decapitated heads and deduced it was a portal between two worlds. The ground was loose and the detective started digging with a shovel. He found the horseman's body, but the skull wasn't there. He concluded that someone must have taken it, and that's why the horseman rises from his grave to collect heads until his is returned. At that moment the horseman rose up seeking new victims. The detective started chasing him, but the horseman mysteriously disappeared into the depths of the valley. He arrived at a couple's house, started fighting with the man, and claimed another victim. Soon after he went after the woman and she met the same fate. The boy hid in the basement, but not for long, meeting the same end as his parents. A resident tried to stop the horseman with a gunshot, but he got up and left, allowing the detective to arrive. The detective says, "The horseman didn't want to kill us, he only killed Bruno because he attacked him. Whoever is controlling the horseman is the one who took his head." At this point there is a tender moment between the detective and Katrina. He declares himself to her and she responds affectionately. But the horseman returns again and claims another victim, this time Katrina's stepmother. Next he goes after her father, but he fled, shouting and calling for Katrina. Everyone ran to the church, but the horseman cannot enter there as it is a sacred place. The townspeople shot at him to no avail, and there was a fight inside the church with Katrina's father. He shot a man who tried to put him out of the church and said, "There is a conspiracy here and I'm going to end it now." Standing near the window, he was an easy target for the horseman, who struck him with a lance. Everyone screamed as he was pulled outside to his end. The detective suspects Katrina, thinking she controls the horseman. So he decides to leave town, devastated and disappointed, saying evil wears many masks. He says goodbye to the young Moses and leaves. Along the way he comes across the removal of Katrina's stepmother's body and notices something strange. He decides to return and check. Upon examining, he finds the cut was made after death and therefore it cannot be the stepmother's body. Indeed, it is not the stepmother because she is alive and well. She used the body of the maid Sarah to pass as dead and is behind all the deaths with the horseman's skull. She invokes him again to take Katrina, becoming the sole heir. The detective arrives to save Katrina. They climb up to a barn loft and are chased by the horseman. They jump from there, but nothing happens to them. In a carriage they flee, pursued by the horseman. They arrive at the tree of the dead and find themselves face to face with Katrina's stepmother. The detective sees she has the horseman's skull and tries to grab it. He takes the bag, gives the skull to the horseman, and just as the horseman is about to kill Katrina, he grabs the head and puts it on his body, regaining his normal form. He mounts his horse and takes Katrina's stepmother, leading her to the depths of hell. Thus ends the legend of the Headless Horseman. Ichabod Crane eventually married Katrina, and along with Mabat they departed for New York in search of a new and happy life. The legend of the Headless Horseman is more than just a simple horror film. It is a masterpiece of the genre that will remain engraved in our minds long after the movie theater lights go out. Thank you very much, and until next time.